So first of all, this isn't like a Android bad, iOS good video, because if you think in those terms, you're strange. But what it is me kind of documenting what happens when you send a bunch of very complicated processes through the like idiot mangle of a not very technical person in order to try and get a game ported to a system that you're not familiar with. In case it wasn't clear, that's me. I'm the idiot in this situation, and I have made a 2D point and click adventure game that came out last year, and it's been on Steam and it's been on iOS, and I thought maybe I should put this on Android because on iOS it's been doing okay. Little did I know that this would be quite an undertaking, and in fact I have a note in my phone that listed every step along this process, which I have titled Android Odyssey, because that's kind of what it was. So in this video I'm going to talk about what happened, where I went wrong, the common things that apparently people who port to Android have to face but that make no sense to a non-technical person, and ultimately where we ended up. So when you're porting a game to a phone, I think the first thing you have to think about is that some phones at least are not as powerful as PCs, and that means you're going to have to think about a minimum sort of threshold for your game, in as much as what is the earliest phone that can run this thing. So when I was porting my game to iOS, I realised that for whatever reason, be it heavy textures and particle effects and various things going on, 2 gigs of RAM was not enough and the game would crash on iOS devices. Now obviously when you have a device that says it's got 2 gigs of RAM, the operating system and back-end stuff is taking up some of that availability. So what you're actually left with is more like 1.2 gigs in that instance, and on iOS when you exceed that threshold, whatever app you're running just crashes. Now I was labouring under the assumption that Android would be slightly different and would run more like a PC, where instead of just like crashing the app, it would bottleneck a bit, but it would be fine. And so I went on eBay, and my first step along this journey was to buy a Moto G5, which was locked on Android 10 and is a phone from about 5 years ago, to try and run my game on. I think this has got 2 gigs of RAM, and that was kind of the point. And yeah, that didn't work. So that was a waste of time and money. What you're probably thinking about that is, well, you should do some extreme optimization stuff to try and get it to work on these older devices. And I did have some people say similar to me about my iOS port, and maybe there's something in that. But the other side of the coin is, I know full well that a device with 4 gigs of RAM will run things just fine. And things have come on in such a way over the last few years that a lot of devices have 4 gigs of RAM, especially on the Android side, and have done for quite a number of years now. So I decided to just stick with that. So sorry if you are running a Moto G5, but you're out. So then I went on Amazon and bought this Samsung something or other, which, side note, it's quite mad how smartphones have been democratized now, to the point where this brand new phone, which is big and has like 2 cameras and stuff and 4 gigs of RAM, is £50 or like what, $60 or something. That's kind of mind-blowing. And yes, the camera is really bad, but hey, if you just need a phone, that's kind of amazing to me. Anyway, long story short, the Biggleboss Incident is only destined for 4GB RAM devices, it seems. But if you think that is the end of the difficulty I had porting this game to Android, we have only just begun. So first of all, here's a weird thing, and I don't know if this is a Mac versus PC thing or whatever, but for some reason I thought, and I'm sure it used to be the case way back when, that if you just connected an Android phone to a computer, it would show up as like a drive that you could drag things into. That's not the case anymore. I needed to download a bit of software called MacDroid, which I think I had to pay for a token amount to get to work, and then that makes the phone appear as like a drive on your hard drive. It's like another step, you know, when you like doing stuff and you go, oh, this is another step that's just annoying me already before we get anywhere. There was that. But anyway, I've got the Samsung phone and I've got my Unity, project for my game that ostensibly is the same as it was for the iOS version, just with the Android doodads installed, and you switch platform to Android, and we go, okay,
I can build the project and export it as an APK, and then connect the Samsung phone via this MacDroid thing,
and install it, and it shows up on the phone. The first big issue I had there was my game uses a lot of video files for cutscenes, and they didn't work, which is kind of a straight out of the gates issue, because literally the opening cutscene of the game is video, and so you can't play that. After some googling, I realised that Android uses a different codec to other platforms, so I just needed to re-encode those videos in Unity. And in some instances where I'd split longer ones in half, it didn't like that, so I had to just kind of re-import them as one video to get it to work. Other than fixing those videos, things broadly were working on the phone. I think the thing that made me laugh the most, and I still don't fully understand, is that some of my scenes had like semi-transparent backgrounds, it turns out. And on PC or Mac or iOS, when you play those, something is happening in the background where it just shows black. On Android though, you can just see the home screen behind the game. It's so weird, like the player was walking around and in the window in the background where I'd forgotten to add a texture, you could just see app icons. I have no idea what's going on there, but it seems that the game is just literally running as a layer on top of the desktop, which is baffling. So much of this stuff is weird. But anyway, after much testing and fixing and re-exporting and testing and fixing and re-exporting, I had a working build of the Android version of this game. It'd already taken a lot longer than I'd hoped, and I'd had to buy 2 phones to do this, but there we were. And so I found this video on YouTube that is a really good tutorial that walks you through every step of setting up your Unity export package, but also the Google Play console, which is where you'll set up your store listing. And I would really recommend watching this video. I've linked it down below, even if some of the things I encountered didn't show up in their video, but it is a generally useful tutorial other than that. So I think, to Google's credit, the most streamlined part of this whole process was setting up the Google Play console. There is a very no-nonsense checklist of things you need to work through. The design of that as a whole page is like leagues better than App Store Connect and Steam's backend as well. And so I found setting up a store page, setting up my developer account and all that kind of stuff quite straightforward. There's one point where you have to answer quite a funny question about whether your game is going to somehow single-handedly take down Korea from the inside, which I don't think mine will. And I think if I am building a game that has the ability to destabilize a nation, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be working for the government. The other cool thing on Google Play is if you are like me and you have a game that you know won't work on certain devices with like RAM constraints, there's a setting in there to literally exclude anything below a certain RAM or anything below a certain processor. And so when I set mine to exclude anything that has at or below 3 gigs of RAM, I think I set it as, it's quite cool in that it says how many devices you have just excluded. And when I did that, it said 15,000 phones no longer work, which is quite bonkers when you think about, you know, there's probably been like 25 iPhones ever made, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of different Android devices out there, which from a developer's point of view is quite scary, but it's nice to be able to go, well, at least these 15,000 are off the table now. But then all the fun stuff stopped and the problem started again. So what happens is when you export an Android build just for yourself on your computer, you export it as an APK. But when you're exporting it for the Google Play Store, you are exporting an AAB file, which is a different kind of bundle and has different kind of requirements. One of those requirements is to match Google's target API, which increases every now and again. It's currently at like 35, API 35 or something like that. Now, the big problem I ran into is I started making this game in Unity 2020 because it was 2020 when I started making the game, and there is a disconnect where Unity 2020 is not able to export at that API 35 level. It caps at like API 31 or something like that. And so I had this version of the game locked in this version of Unity and a target for Android that's higher, and they're not compatible. There's no way to do that. And so I did some Googling, and then I ended up on Gemini. So I figured this is a Google product, and maybe Gemini has swallowed the entire user manual for Google Play and Android at some point, and that might be expeditious. And this is where we enter like a cautionary tale about AI, I guess, as a troubleshooting mechanic, because once again, I don't know what I'm doing, but I assume that the AI might in some regard. And so I started asking Gemini how to get around this API issue, and it started suggesting a bunch of like wacky fixes where I'm going into folders in Unity and in the terminal and, you know, in some scripts to try and effectively trick Unity into thinking it can produce these API 35 level Android exports. And there's me going along believing it and like optimistically hoping we'll get there, but it doesn't work. And ultimately I kind of had to get the AI to stop gaslighting me, and I just said, look, is this actually possible to do this? And it turned around and was like, oh no, yeah, this will never work. But you know, AI doesn't like to say no, it likes to go, yeah, let's just try this and that and the other. But yeah, it just wasted quite a lot of my time, so I guess don't do that. At which point it said, what you're going to have to do is just update Unity. Now, I had never updated Unity. For my upcoming game, I have installed Unity 6 as a separate thing, but I had never done an update for an existing project because I just have this fear that everything is going to break. And so moving from Unity 2020 to a version of Unity 2022 that can do the latest software update was quite terrifying. And so I pushed the big update button quite tentatively, to be honest. And when I then opened the project again, I was just pretty convinced that literally every part of it was going to be broken. If you haven't followed this channel before, I made this game using a plugin called Adventure Creator, which is a very no-code solution. So if things were going to break, I didn't know how to unpick them other than using the systems within that plugin. What actually happened was quite misrepresentative because the first two scenes were quite broken in a way that the rest weren't. And there was some weird stuff going on that I just had to troubleshoot. Like, again, there was some video stuff that was being a bit funny. One of my characters was suddenly enormous, and there was some strange sorting map stuff there that I needed to figure out. And then there were various other things where some action lists, the order of things had gone a bit funny, or if there were unused things in an action list, they had suddenly been incorporated and that broke the flow. So that was another few days of trying to troubleshoot all this stuff and get a working build again. And again, you know, if you've ever been through this, you know it's okay, I think it's ready, export it, put it on the phone, test it, oh, it's broken, try again. And it's like this very time consuming and very annoying every time you have to do it. And as I'm sure you know, when you've made a game and you've tested it a million times, you're kind of sick to the back teeth of it. Like, you're making this thing that you think is good and you want people to play, but when you've played it a billion times, it really does lose its luster somewhat. Anyway, then I finally got it working. I'd played it through from start to finish and it all worked and everything was great. Let's export this AAB file. Did that. Let's upload it to Google Play. No, your file size is too big. And so this is something that wasn't in that tutorial video, where there's basically a button in the back end of the build settings to say split binary. What does split binary mean? I have no idea, but you tick that box and it just means there's like a base install version of your game and then the rest of it is installed after that. If you need that setting, why wouldn't you just have that box ticked by default? This is what I'm talking about when I say this stuff is so like out of reach of people who don't inherently understand technology. But finally, I had a version of this thing that Google had accepted and that had passed their review phase. And so I was doing all this in the run up to Christmas because I just figured it would be nice for me to get it done and then I can relax over Christmas, but also maybe to like sort of soft launch it in the gap between Christmas and New Year because people might have new devices and time off work. And so I hit publish on December 27th and I sent out a press release and I did some posts. My post on the Android gaming subreddit was doing well, but then I started to get a bunch of comments saying, what is your min SDK? Because my phone can't run this. And you're never going to believe this, but min SDK is another term that I didn't understand. It turns out that in the build settings, there is basically minimum Android version and target Android version. And whereas target needs to be that API 35, minimum can be whatever you want it to be. And so I stuck a finger in the air and arbitrarily chose Android 11 because that feels like a few years ago and I hoped it would all be okay. So did that, rebuild, republish, re-upload, it went through review and update went out, replied to those people in Reddit and said sorry about that, it should work now. And then that was that. Now, where I got quite lucky is, whereas I'd sent my press release out on Games Press on the 27th of December, I had these 2 days of mucking around with this API level, got it fixed, and then basically the day I got it fixed, the guys at Games Press, I guess, had got back from Christmas break and published the press release that day. So I actually had some coverage on a couple of websites about the port going out after this issue was hopefully fixed. So I got lucky in that sense with my timing and with my being an idiot with stuff. So yeah, the Biggleboss Incident has an Android port now. Since going live, just in terms of stats and stuff, it's not been setting the world alight. I think there's been about 3 or 4 downloads a day so far. On iOS, for example, over Christmas, the game was doing 15-ish downloads a day. Normally, I would say outside of Christmas holiday breaks, that's more like 10. So I'm hoping that Android One will climb up steadily. What I want is for some people to leave reviews of it, I suppose, because at the minute it doesn't have any, and then I guess people are suspicious of that. The other thing is that Android has more of a piracy issue than iOS. The day after those news stories hit, I started seeing wonky versions of my game appear in Google where it says free APK download, and whereas my updated min SDK version is version 1.0.1, some people are promising version 1.0.2, which is exciting. marketing. But I guess that's just they've downloaded it, shoved a bunch of adverts in there, and then are offering it for free. I don't know. But yeah, it is at least an app that's available on the Google Play Store. But it's a funny one. I don't feel very confident about it, in a sense. So much of this is unknown to me that even though I know in theory the game works and I've tested it through from start to finish, there are so many Android devices that I'm just pretty confident someone's going to play it and it's not going to work on theirs. And there's very little you can do about that other than hope for the best, because you cannot test your game on every Android device. But I suppose, long story short, I do think it's worth doing, because even if this just ticks along at a small amount, it's still some extra pocket money that goes into the seed fund for the next game. And it's another notch on the old experience belt where I can say I've published an Android game, which is quite cool, especially as I don't know what I'm doing. So look, yeah, thanks for coming with me on this terrible odyssey. The Biggleboss Incident is out on Android if you want to buy it and play it. It's out on iOS and Steam also, and I have an upcoming game called The Murder of Ava Monroe, which you can also wishlist on Steam, and follow this channel for devlogs of that. Otherwise, I suppose, go off and have a nice life. Bye.
I'm trying to save you.
From the bathroom?
From this company, idiot.
Amy, listen to me. There was a guy in the vent.
And what did this mystery vent graffiti artist say?
Oh, for the love of...
Mostly conspiratorial stuff about the company.
In that case, I see those giant rats up here every Friday evening.
Okay, this is just getting silly now.
Sir, please ignore any visual inconsistencies and continue about your day.
So, what's it like being a robot?
Every moment I live is agony.
Oh, God, really?
No.
Weird question, but what can you tell me about Biggleboss Inc.?
They are weak, fragile nothings.
What do we do here?
You don't know what we do at the company you work for.
Little advice.
Sure.
Things you say to HR aren't really confidential.
I see. In that case, forget I said anything.
Oh, dear sweet Tom. You just don't get it, do you?
So stay alert. He'll be through here, I know it.
Why are you still here? This building, this whole company, it's a sham.
Isn't every company? Just turn up, do the work, and remember the company motto. There is nothing sinister happening at Biggleboss Inc.
Sound good?
I don't know about good, but it sure sounds like something that's about to happen.